Hey, Bill and Ned, welcome back to the podcast.
Great to be back.
Thanks, Debbie. We always love talking with you.
Well, I feel the same. Anyway, I know you guys both personally. I consider you friends and colleagues, and I'm also like a fan. So I'm in this really interesting position. But I always refer to your work, The Self-Driven Child. Still, I mention a lot on my show. It is still such a critical book in my parenting journey, and I recommend it all the time. And when I found out that you were coming out with a workbook related to that, I was like, oh yeah, I need the workbook, and I need to share it with my people. Let me just share the name of the workbook again, and then I want to learn a little bit more about specifically why you wrote this and who you wrote it for. So it's called The 7 Principles for Raising a Self-Driven Child. And if you're listening to this podcast as it's released on this day, the book is now available. And I was so lucky to get an advance copy, and I cannot wait to get my hands on the actual like tactical workbook and dive in. But share a little bit about, what you put out there. Because as I said before we started recording, this isn't just a self-driven child where you've kind of taken everything and just put in a couple of prompts, which again would have value. But you've really created such a powerful, I think, tool for parents to really do the deep work, which I'm a big fan of, so that they can apply all of these ideas with success and effectiveness in their lives. So talk a little bit about who it's for and how you wanted to approach that.
I mean, the way that I think about this is, I'll tell the introduction to the book. When we were first lecturing for The Self-Driven Child, Bill and I were going all over the DC area, kind of school after school after organization after organization. And at some point, Bill took note that there was a woman there who kept showing up over and over and over. And at one point, he went up to her and said, "Hey, it's great to see you, but I gotta ask. You seem to come to everything that we do, and to be honest, it's kind of the same talk every time. Like, my jokes are the same jokes. Like, why are you here?" And she says, "I listen to you, Bill. I listen to Ned, and it just makes so much sense. And it's right not to be on my kids all the time, to treat them in ways that are respectful and less controlling. And then I'll go out and my kid will do something, so dopey, right? Or I'll talk from some friend who's all spun up, and she'll get me spun up, and then I'm back to controlling. And so I just keep coming back. And every time I talk to you, sort of helps me reset and put things kind of right in my world. And the idea behind this workbook is that we're all homeostatic, right? We all have scripts that we run, the patterns that we fall back into. And so while we think The Self-Driven Child is a brilliant, insight and treatise on how to live one's life, the reality is that we can take, a great idea from Debbie, a great idea from Jess or Tina or, any of us, but then making great thinking becoming great practices. It isn't always easy. And so the idea of this is for exercise and reflection to really take what we think is some better thinking and operationalize these and make these better practices. So it's reflections, they're exercises, they're all these what kind of post-it ready quotes, like, put this all over your, put this on your refrigerator or your bathroom mirror, just to remind people and help people make these things practices for them and their families.
Yeah. And I'll just add that The Self-Driven Child, I think we think it's sold 1 million copies around the world now. And because this idea of empowering kids to have a sense of control over their own lives, it's really a powerful idea. And people all over the world want things to feel more in control. And how do I help my kid with that? And yet, both our first 2 books are 300 pages, and there's a lot of science in them, and there's a lot of practical stuff too. But nobody ever asked us about the last 3 chapters in the book. I mean, and so what we wanted to do was to kind of distill our best thinking from both our books into a book that is based on principles. Because I've been thinking lately about what we talk about in The Self-Driven Child, the 4 postulates of motivation. Which is that you can't make somebody do something against their will. You can't make them want what they don't want. You can't make them not want what they want. And you can't make them do, and you can't, if you try to change them, without their permission, you get conflict and resistance. And these are literally true, but they're hard to grasp. They're hard to accept. And I think that so our mission for this third book was to make it feel as safe as possible and as right as possible, to move in this direction of supporting your kid to by the time he leaves home, or she leaves home, or they leave home, to run their own life. And so that's kind of the short, practical. There's not a lot of new science in it. But based on principles that we can, if you ground yourself in principles, I hold these things to be true. These are things that are going to ground me. It's a lot easier to apply the practices.
They're not self-evident, but they are evident.
Well put, my friend. Yeah.
Yeah, this idea of principles, it is something I wanted to dive a little deeper into. Because you introduced 7 and later on in the conversation I'd like to go through some of them in more detail. But say more about that, and actually maybe in how you shaped the book, or went about trying to distill the self-driven child and what do you say into this really practical and, as you said, operational experience for readers.
Well, I mean, we figured that we'd already written 2 fairly long books, a lot of, and people can always refer back if they want more science, if they want more, they go back and reread those. But we just felt that we want something that's really accessible, and people increasingly are reading less and less, and we just want something that's accessible, that's practical, and that allows you to. I mean, the pushback that people give is that, if I give my kid more control, I get more anxious because I feel I have no control, and a low sense of control is the most stressful thing you can experience. And the people said this wasn't the way that I was raised. Or my parents say I'm spoiling my kid, that kind of stuff. And we just want exercises to help people work through that and kind of align the way they're raising the kids with their own values. And so I think what we did was we thought about what are really the most important things that we teach people, that seem to be helpful to people. And then how do we prioritize these? How do we sequence them in a way that people can access this stuff? And it's just, when people apply these principles, it just works because they're grounded in the reality, in part, that really is your kid's life, and you can't make them do stuff. But it's hard. And so we just thought, we initially had 10. And that's too many. People can't remember 10. And then so we organize it to be 7, and try to indicate in the book how they're related to each other. Make it easier to understand and see it not as just here's one little technique, here's one technique, but it's kind of a more coordinated whole.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so The Self-Driven Child came out in 2018. This is the same year that my book, Differently Wired, came out. My book has not sold 1 million copies, so I'm kind of in awe of you guys. But I'd love to know, because the world has changed.
China's part of it.
Yeah, being popular in China helps. There's a lot of people there.
I'm not a big deal necessarily in my workplace or my home, but in China, I'd be a really big deal. So I may move. Anyway.
Wow, that's fascinating. Okay, super interesting. But thinking about what has happened in the world since 2018, we're now in 2025. In terms of kids' mental health, in terms of, of course, COVID, and we don't need to go down a deep rabbit hole with this, but I'm just wondering, when you reapproached, this subject matter and the themes for this book, and really started to think about what are these key principles, was there anything that you had to kind of adapt or adjust or rethink because of the way the landscape has changed over the past 7 years?
Well, I mean, certainly, probably more quantitative than qualitative changes. I mean, the incidence of mental health continue to increase in ways that are deeply concerning, and everyone's trying to figure this out. Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation, putting lots of energy into limiting or controlling or regulating social media and access to it by young people. But one of the concerns that we have is, as these challenges have gotten more, and parents and educators in the whole country have gotten more concerned about these things, it appears to us that the tendency keeps going towards what can we as adults do or change or, frankly, control in the lives of young people, with the idea of trying to help them be better. And we just really think that, in many ways, that they've cut the cart before the horse. And if we know that a healthy sense of control is the most important thing you can confer on a young person, in part because a low sense of control is the most stressful thing you can experience. And low intrinsic motivation is a transdiagnostic criterion for mental health disorders. That anything that moves away from the direction of fostering in young people a healthy sense of control and autonomy and the brain state that supports it is really, it's going the wrong direction, and it's doomed to failure. So we have a chapter at the end of this book about bringing the sense of control to school, because that's where kids spend most of their waking time. And rather than trying to shift school from a source of suffering, as it is for so many young people, we really want to move that in a direction of supporting their autonomy, supporting their agency, and all the good things that come from that. One, from their being more well-educated and engaging in school, but also the mental health benefits that come from that. So it's hard, because the culture right now, certainly within the current administration, is more command and control, and we just think it's going in the wrong direction.
And I'll just mention that the two things I think for me, Debbie, since 2018, number one, we just become even more sure that this sense of control is a really powerful and wonderful idea. So for just a couple of examples, we learned that the studies that look like the reason that cognitive behavioral therapy helps kids primarily is it increases their sense of control. And then the same thing with exercise and meditation. Because you said life is better in perspective. You feel like I'm more competent being able to handle things. And also, the more we just continue to study what motivates people, and just this power of intrinsic motivation, what it does to the brain, how differently the brain works when it's intrinsically motivated. And I think the other thing for me that's happened is that this increasing awareness that, as Ned said, for so many kids, especially once they're teenagers, school is the major source of their suffering. They're just one of our friends did a study in 3 Ohio high schools. Yeah, asked kids, that kids are really high levels of anxiety and depression, predictably. And he asked them, what are the major sources of your stress? And the top 12 all had to do with schooling and academic pressure. And had nothing to do with social media, had nothing to do with bullying or online bullying. It all had to do with academic stuff. And I would say that's the major thing for me, was thinking now that schools have increasingly, they've less recess, less play, more instructional time, more AP classes. And a 10th grader taking 2 AP classes sleeps an hour less than 10th graders who don't. And I just think we have a toxic system here in our honest attempts to educate kids and get them prepared for the world, but we're moving in the wrong direction. As Ned said, I think the energy is going the wrong way. So I think those are two major things for me.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. And I couldn't agree more that the timing for this book is so critical, and that we are moving in the wrong direction. And so this feels exciting to me to get this into the hands of people. And I did love that. I love a good appendix, like, full disclosure, but the appendix that you had at the end about practicing and creating a sense of control in schools, I thought was so good, because you are thoughtfully and respectfully supporting educators, right? You're not, I recently had Amanda Moore and Emily Kircher Morris on talking about their book, Neurodiversity Affirming Schools. And they're like, we're not trying to call people out, we're trying to call people in. And I feel like that's what your appendix is doing as well.
Thanks.
And anyway, so I really appreciated that. So important. So I want to go through some of the principles. We won't go through all of them, because you're going to have to get the workbook, listeners, to check it out. But I did, a couple of them I wanted to touch upon and just share some things that jumped out at me. The first one was to put connection first. There were some concepts in there that were just, simple, but really, like, this idea of a window of openness. I'm like, yes, that's what we need to do, is be aware of when there is a window of openness to connect, right? And as I was reading that chapter, I always try to channel what my listeners would be curious about. And just what do you do, or how do you advise parents to kind of focus on connection and try to strengthen connection with their kids if their kids really have no interest in spending time with them, are shutting them out? Maybe they're just not good communicators at all, and the parents they don't even know where to start.
Yeah. And I think that a couple of things we've learned since 2018, is that just recently learned that close family relationships are are more protective of kids emotionally than income or even the safety of your neighborhood. I mean, it's a powerful thing, and I think that closeness looks different for different people. You got a kid who is very extroverted kind of kid, and you spend a lot of time kind of going back and forth. You got a kid, you got an autistic kid. It's a different way of getting close, and I certainly there are times in my raising of two teenagers where they didn't have much interest in me, but I still drove them places. When I brought them home from practices or games in the evening, they were much more open. They're a little tired. It was dark. They were in the back seat. We weren't making eye contact. It didn't feel like a direct conversation. There's nothing threatening about it. And they just open up. And that was kind of the window for me of my own. And certainly I pick up my granddaughters from gymnastics twice a week. And one of them, if it was light out, she'd be reading. But I got her at dark. And I just think, and if they aren't talking, I just talk a little bit about myself. I just tell them a little bit about my day, and then they usually respond and bring up something. What would you add, Ben?
Well, I think your point about different temperaments. I mean, I have my kids are wonderful, but they're quite different. And my son is as noisy as I am, and my daughter who's autistic. I mean, her communication is different, and oftentimes she doesn't want to. Um, if she's sort of burned out, she just doesn't want more time with me or frankly anyone. Um, but so sometimes people feel that. It was funny. I was put something on TikTok or whatever, and this dad was saying, my daughter doesn't want to talk with me, and I said, here's the great thing: to be helpful to her, she doesn't necessarily have to talk to you, but to know that she can. To know that you can, that alone will help. And so I remember when my daughter would get really, things were going on, and I could see how unhappy she was, usually after school. And I was always, making about me. I was so worried I'd done something wrong. And I said, are you okay? And she'd shake her head. And I said, is there something I did that? And she no. I said, do you want to talk about it? No. Anything I can do right now? No. And just shaking. It was all nonverbal. She's just shaking her head. And so it was clear she did not have the energy. She didn't want to have a conversation about this. But I felt stuck because I didn't want to press her, but I also didn't want to sort of emotionally abandon her, right? And so I said, so sweetie, I can see that something's really going on, and you're pretty upset. I don't want to I don't want to press, but I do want to help. Is it okay if I circle back, in half an hour, 45 minutes, just to check in and see whether there's anything that can help and see that you're okay? And she get this little nod of her head. And I swear to gosh, if I said I'll come back in 45 minutes, she'd bound downstairs in 30. If I said I'll come back in half an hour, she'd bound down in 20. And whatever cloud had come across her had drifted away. And not once did I ever find out what the thing was that she was upset about. Not once. But it didn't matter, right? Because we all have things that in a perfect world, it's just like meditation, dark thought come and dark thoughts go, right? And that's where we want to be. And so a lot of times I think we as parents feel like we have to be the person to help get our kids out of the funk, to talk them out of the difficult thing, that the situation they are. But if we remind ourselves, really the ideal thing is that they talk themselves out of it, that they put things into perspective. I don't try to put things into perspective for them. And we know that this idea being, as we talk about in all these books, and this one as well, being a non-anxious presence. And I don't get upset and try to force her to talk to me. But it's sort of this gentle, there's not much communication going on, but sort of gentle support as best I can. and then that puts her in her right mind, and she's able to shift her own thinking, which is really what we want, because there's been all sorts of times when I'm not there, and it shouldn't be about me. It should be about her having the developing those tools and that sense of control.
That's a great point, Ned.
Yeah, like so many truth bombs that you just dropped. You know, and a quote that now I'm also going to integrate into my. You know, I have so many scripts from you guys that I use with my kiddo, but I don't want to press, but I do want to help is so powerful. And the fact that you said not once did I actually find out what the issue was is such a good reminder that that's not the point. The point, and it's not about us, right? And that is so hard for us as parents because we do want to share wisdom. We want to problem solve. We want to do all these things. So I just appreciate those reminders.
But I know stuff. I mean, I think about the three of us, right? It's like, but I know stuff.
Yeah.
And every parent listening, and of course they do. Of course they have advice, and of course they have wisdom, and of course they have experience, and they want to share all of it. But again, to your point, it's not about us. It's about the kid, and you know, mission accomplished is mission accomplished. So
yeah.
And
go ahead, Ned.
Just I mean, you gave them. I think the two most important messages are that I really care about you. You're really important to me. Is there any way that I can help? You know, and I think that you know, kids, adolescents particularly, they're biologically driven to move away from their parents and spend more time with their kids, and have other kids be the main kind of source of engagement and reward in their life. And the main thing is that we let them know still that even if they don't want to spend a lot of time with us, they still do things with it. That we still take them places. We still can put something on their bed that we were thinking about they may be interested in. Just show that we care about them. That's the most important.
Yeah,
just that we're available to help.
I had my 20-year-old home for winter break. First, you know, this is the first year at university, and it was really interesting figuring this out. And of course, I want to connect as much as possible. And I also just wanted to just back off and let that time be whatever my child needed it to be. And my not trick, but my strategy perhaps was, you know, to just put out a jigsaw puzzle because I know that Ash cannot resist that. And so, and even sometimes after dinner, like, you know, I'll be like, oh, do you want to work on the puzzle for a little bit? And I, you know, the response would be, no, I'm going to go upstairs and work on my music or whatever. I'd be like, cool, no problem. But then I'd be cleaning up the dishes and I'd see them wander over and sit down and start like working on. And so I'd finish the dishes and I'd sit down. I wouldn't say a word. And like an hour will have gone by and we're just quietly working on the puzzle together. And I was like, oh, I will do this. As long as you are willing to puzzle with me, I'm there for it.
Yeah, beautiful.
That's such a wonderful example and such a beautiful image, you know, because, you know, and you know, especially when, you know, people have different temperaments. My daughter is also a huge puzzler, and it's so hard for all of us, but I mean, for me, most of all, to remind myself that what I need and what I want and what fills my cup and my communication style is not my daughter's, right? She just experiences the world and lives the world differently. And so what I need, you know, when I can remind myself to pay attention to what does she actually want and need. And so I love the puzzle. It's like, it's like a mousetrap with a little puzzle piece wrapped with a piece of cheese on it.
Yeah.
That's funny. Okay. So the fifth principle in the book is to motivate your kids without trying to change them. And I think this is one of the most difficult things for us to do as parents. I'm sure, you know, you've talked to parents so often in your work and probably have a lot of experience being on the other end of this as well. Talk about how you approached this chapter in the workbook to help parents really kind of, I guess, buy into this idea that they can't change their kids and that there are other ways to go about motivating them.
But I think that we wrote about motivation in our first two books. And I think that when we write about it in the second book, we realize that when so many parents are always asking us, how do I motivate my kid? And we realize that what they're really asking us is, how do I change my kid? And how do I get to do his homework? How do I get him to care about this? How do I get him to go on vacation with us? How do I change my kid from where he is now to someplace else? And so we really looked at the science of change. And every place we look, what we learned is that if you try to make somebody change, to try to change somebody who's not asking you to help them change, as I said earlier, you get conflict resistance, but only every time. You know, and it's just true. And as human beings, that one of the things we focused on in our second book was motivational interviewing, which is this kind of dialogue approach that's used a lot in therapy to help people kind of get to find their own solutions to problems. And it doesn't involve you need to do this, try this, try this. It means just listening reflectively. I'm not trying to understand, because what people tend to be ambivalent about virtually anything, about changing in any way. And if we keep saying, you need to do this, you need to do this, they argue, no, I'm not going to do that. It's too hard, or maybe I'll fail, whatever. And so if we stop arguing one side of that ambivalence, we listen, eventually they say, well, maybe I need to change. And we've seen some dramatic examples of that in our own work. Certainly, this kind of approach is used all over the world. And we also thought about this new program, this SPACE program, that comes out of Yale. Are you familiar with it, Debbie? The Supportive Parenting of Anxious Childhood Emotions. It's
L.A. Leibowitz.
Yeah, it's L.A. Leibowitz.
Yeah,
it's a brilliant program it's as effective in reducing kids' anxiety as therapy for the kid, and it only works with parents. There's another illustration of the fact that we have a lot of power, we have a lot of influence on our kids, but the SPACE program works by focusing simply on what are we going to do as parents. What do we think is right? What's the right thing for us to do? And then to do that and not try to change the kid. And so, I think that I think that the idea that if you try to make somebody do something, you try to make a 2-year-old do something, and they lay on the ground and start screaming. If the idea is getting in the car, you can pick them up, put them in the car, but they aren't getting in the car. You simply can't. You can't make an infant stop crying. You can't make them eat. And once we make peace with the fact that force doesn't work, we can't make people do things. Force is off the table. Then we're more flexible. Then we think more flexibly. We find other ways to influence people and help them find their own reasons to change.
The thing I'd add there really quickly is when we take force off the table, think more flexible, because when we force someone else and they feel low sense of control, by definition, they are going to be less cognitively, emotionally flexible, right? Because it's so stressful, right? So that executive function just goes right out the window, right? So, and so part of, as a parent, we often think, well, gosh, if only they were thinking about this the way that I'm thinking about it, they would agree with me. But some of the reflection exercises in there are to think about how do you as a parent feel when your spouse tells one example there, and Debbie, 3 cups of coffee, don't you think 2 would be enough? And you're like, hey, buzz off, man, right? I live in freaking Amsterdam now. It's cold and rainy all the time. I need this, right? And don't you think that? And no one ever said, hey, don't you think you should have cut it down? And you're like, nope, I don't. And you argue in your head all the reasons why, of course, I deserve this cup of coffee. And, get over yourself, Ned, because you did anything anyway. And it just, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so the exercises here were to point out, one, take note of what happened when you try to talk your kid into this, that, the other. How often? What's that feel like? But also for yourself. If your mother-in-law tells you should really don't you think you should, dust a little bit more often? You're like, I mean, oh my gosh, no one ever I'm going to get right on that. Said nobody. Nobody ever.
Yeah. And it's so interesting, because when we were writing in the second book, that there's a school counselor who used this kind of listening, this kind of this kind of communication technique. This kind of it's really a dialogue technique with one of her clients in school, a school counselor, and the kid stopped smoking pot without any attempt to get the kid to stop smoking pot. And what I had just tested a 15-year-old kid while we were working this chapter who was smoking pot all summer. And he was a very good basketball player, really wanted to make the varsity. And so I sent the mom a draft copy of the chapter, and I said, just try this approach. And she sat down with the kid. They've already found his stash a couple of times and got rid of it, and lectured him and scolded him and threatened him. But he kept smoking. And so she simply said, so tell me, what does pot do for you? And he just told all these how wonderful he feels, or he's less stressed, he's more fun with his friends, and it's COVID, and it's tolerable. And eventually, she's kind of feeds back. So it sounds like it really does help you feel better. And he says, yeah. Eventually, he says, yeah, but I can't make myself practice as hard as I need to make the varsity in the fall. And by the end of summer, he wasn't smoking pot anymore. And that's the kind of when kids voice their own reason for change. And I was just so struck that a parent with no training, because this isn't rocket science. This is really simple stuff. You just ask kids kind of open questions, listen to the response, let them know you're trying to understand. And so often, eventually, because they don't want to suffer, they want their life to work. They kind of figure it out. And I think Ned, the example you gave with your daughter, you let her know I care about you. Then you gave her space, and she's bound down 20 or 30 minutes later, having figured it out herself, which is exactly what we want.
Yeah,
is to solve their own problems.
What I hope people get when they go through this, we have a whole exercise where you take basically any issue and you can articulate the reasons why. If I, work harder, and do more homework, I'll get better grades, I'll get better choices, I'll get better people, sharper, my parents will get better. They come up with 100 reasons why I might want to engage more in school or whatever the thing is. But there are also all these reasons on the other side. And what happens is I think we can all recognize this, when we argue one side of the equation, the kid will argue, yeah, but, and they'll fight back, as opposed to taking up our side. And then the real challenge, as I see it, is all those wonderful reasons that are all valid and true, and that's why we as parents make them. They become poison pills. And so the kid has to come up with, if he eventually changes his mind and says, I do want to, study harder, clean more, smoke less pot, whatever, they have to come up with a reason other than those ones that we've given them, because they're tainted.
Yeah, right.
You don't want to do that.
Yeah.
Again, so many important things that you just shared. And I'll just say one of the questions I get the most of in this community starts with how many words? Starts with the 7 words. How do I get my child to ... And my answer is always the same. You can't get your child to do anything. Like, we cannot control, we can't control another person. And I have a lot of evidence that is true, because I've tried for many years. But again, what you mentioned, Ned, is what I appreciated so much about these principles, about this principle in particular, was the questions that you guide parents through in that chapter really do help the reader feel like how terrible it is when someone else is trying to control you. Yeah. And the challenge then is to look at our kids as creative and resourceful and whole humans. And really, that's not so easy to do in a culture where the norm is about compliance, right? And that is being reinforced more and more, I think, every day, unfortunately. So, but that to me, that just stood out as an example of why this workbook, I think, is so powerful, because when we can really then feel, that embodied sense of another person trying to control me, then we can be like, oh, that's what my kid's experiencing too. And that then gives us motivation to show up in a different way to that dynamic.
Yeah.
That. I was rereading this morning, and just thinking, if I'm trying to get in shape, right? the holidays, I ate every carbohydrate that was available to me right in the beginning. Right? And if I'm sitting down to dinner and my wife say, that was an awfully big piece you just took there, right? What would my reaction be? I mean, go pound sand, right? And the challenge is, I want to, everyone wants to be getting, this is the time of year, everyone wants to be getting more fit. I already have that motivation, right? And the thing that's so interesting is when we use these approaches and we're respectful, it goes back to the connection they're talking about before, Debbie. It deepens our connection because we feel more connected to people who treat us respectfully. And here's the thing that's fun: that closeness, that relationship, is one of the core attributes of intrinsic motivation. So treating me respectfully makes me want to then do the thing. And here's the real fun kicker: we as humans, and our children especially, are most likely to buy into our priorities, our values, the closer they feel to us. Even if the things that they don't, I don't really love that sports team, or I don't vote that way, whatever, they're much more likely to slide in our direction when they feel close to us. So these they all kind of have these wonderful feedback loops on one another.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to wrap up. We won't go through everything, but I do want to just highlight, you have a principle on being a non-anxious presence for your family, which is one of your kind of core concepts that runs throughout all of your work, which I love. And the last principle was to encourage radical downtime, which I really appreciated. And then, of course, that meaty, awesome appendix for educators and schools that I thought was fantastic. So as we wrap up, is there anything that we didn't touch upon that you would want listeners to take away from this conversation who are inspired perhaps to really to do this work and dive in and see how it can change their relationship with their child and maybe get results that will feel better for the whole family?
The one thing I'd say, Debbie, is that one of the things that strikes us, I think increasingly, is how delusional the thinking is about what it takes to be successful and happy in this life as kids grow up. I mean, we're just constantly talking with kids who basically think, I am my grades. That the most important outcome of my whole childhood and adolescence is where I go to college. If I get into a good college, my whole life is set. And it's just delusion. It's delusional because it's just so out of touch with reality. And I think that we have a chapter in this book on helping kids grow up with an accurate model of reality, of really what it takes to create a life for yourself that's meaningful. And for us, the kids grow up to think I got to maximize potential. And our angle is you maximize your potential by creating a life that you're happy with. And so I think I really like that I like that chapter and the focus on happiness and what really makes people. When 20 years ago, we started studying happy people as opposed to just people who have anxiety, depression stuff. And they really studied what makes people feel happy and fulfilled and just give a sense of well-being. And we know there's a whole science to it now, and kids don't have any clue about it. Mm-hmm. The kids get into elite university. I tested 2 kids in the same week, high school seniors. They both got into college, and I said they're both on medicine for anxiety and depression. Really high achieving kids, really elite schools. I said, are there times when you feel happy? And they both said, independently, I felt happy the day I got into college. It lasted 1 day. They get into Yale, they're miserable at Yale. Yale didn't do it. And so I think I like the focus in that chapter on helping kids understand there's so many ways to make your way in this world, to find a place for yourself in this world that's meaningful, that's purposeful, it's just the kids have this very narrow lens, this very narrow path. It's just wrong.
Love that, Bill. And and I would sort of fold into that point that you made a moment ago, Debbie, about that idea of a non-anxious presence. And part of what happens, I think, for kids and also for us, is when we imagine this certain, nirvana, right? If our kids stay on this path, they're going to have, the world will be there when we're in the sun and the moon. We worry if they're not on that path, all these great things that they won't have, as opposed to thinking about all the other experiences that they will. And for folks who have, listened to our conversations with you before, may recall that I've told the story before about my daughter, who was in 8th grade, was 3 months full school refusal. Now I'm a guy who helps people get into college. Like, what's my inner monologue? And so I'm the space because I went and do all this work with Bill around these books. On the other hand, I'm like, oh, I do think about college a little bit, right? And so much of the point that we make is so much of our work is on ourselves, right? Not on the kids. And so I've never meditated more in my life than I did those 3 months. I fortunately had a somewhat of lull in work, so I could sleep more and I could exercise more, and just really had to take the long view. And so fast forward, my daughter's in her second year of college now. At age 19, got diagnosed with autism, which explains a lot of what was hard for her in 8th and 7th and 8th and 9th and 10th and 11th and 12th grade. And she's doing great. I mean, she's just this incredible human. And the friend who was a therapist, said it'll be interesting to see what Katie Johnson decides to do with that remarkable mind when she figures out what she wants to do.
Yeah.
And she didn't know for 5 years. She really didn't know who she was. So it's hard to know, who do I want to be and how do I live it. And I think we as a family did a pretty good job saying, we love you no matter what. And it's your work. We'll help you, but it's your work to figure out kind of what do you want to do and what life do you want to live, just to feel safe. And it's nice to be able to report, as it is for so many kids who struggle, that she's on the other side of it, and their life is not perfect, by her standards. But man, is she doing great. And so much of part of this workbook is also just to help parents to develop a practice of knowing that, feeling safe to trust their kids and to support them and not be on them all the time.
Yeah.
Partly because we weaken that connection with them. And it just doesn't work, right? So we want, if you can back off kids to be closer to them, not be on top of them, or at least back off to have a closer connection, there's so many good things come out of that. Yeah. And we hope that this workbook helps people move in that direction.
Yeah. And from our angle, it really does apply across the whole spectrum of neurodiversity. And I'm really happy that in autism now that there's increasing focus on happiness, the science of happiness, the science of motivation that focuses on autonomy, what's important to them, because so much for so many years, the focus with autistic young people was to get them to do stuff. How do we get them to do stuff? And not a focus on who are they as people? What do they care about? What's important to them? And you're raising your own autistic daughter, Ned. I mean, that with loving these kind of principles, it simply works. And she's thriving as a young adult in a way that would have been hard to predict when she was in 8th grade. But
I mean, nobody knew that she was autistic, including her. I think, Debbie, you've had Bill's colleague Donna Henderson on your podcast. And full disclosure, through Bill's connection, met with Donna, and she did the evaluation for Katie. And at the end of it, she said, there's 7 criteria for and you have to have all 3 of the social and 2 of the 4 of the physical ones. And Donna said, for some people, it's kind of, maybe yes, maybe no. She said it wasn't even close. You checked all 7 boxes. But she had so beautifully masked her entire life. Nobody knew she was autistic, including the people who evaluated her in 8th grade, and of course, including her. And it was so funny because at the end of it, Donna asked her, "How are you feeling?" And Katie's basically floating up in the sky. She's so happy to have this insight on her. And Donna looks over and so, "How are the parents feeling?" And I said, "I feel like I'm a character at the end of the movie, The Sixth Sense." It's like, no, And it all made sense. But sometimes, and the thing that's interesting is this. To your point, Bill, works for this is not for neurotypical kids. This is not for neurodiverse children. These are all people, because these are all foundational human needs and foundational human tools. So no matter who you are as a parent or who you have as a child, these are all things that can help us move back. So it's nice that it works.
Yeah.
And be close to them without being on top of them. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, you guys, there's just so many nuggets in here. And I think, just to wrap us up here, that you know, parents don't have, even just going back to teaching your kids an accurate model of reality, a lot of parents they haven't taken the time to consider what does it mean to be happy for themselves. And so that's why what you're doing in this workbook, I think, is so important, because when we work on ourselves in this way, and that's what so much of what I do at Tilt is, helping parents kind of like look at themselves, it changes everything. And it's like, we have to like turn the spotlight on ourselves to do this. And so I just want to name the workbook again so listeners can go check it out. Again, it's called The 7 Principles for Raising a Self-Driven Child, a workbook. It is out today as this episode drops, and I will have an extensive show notes page where I'll share our previous interviews. I'll share that conversation with Donna, as well as her awesome book, Is This Autism?, which is phenomenal, and any other resources that came up. And I just want to say congratulations to both of you, and thank you so much for everything you shared today.
Thanks, Debbie.
It's a complete pleasure. Congratulations on all you're doing too, Debbie. Man.
Thank you.